Hi, welcome back to my channel, La Fraise. I'm Noémie, I'm a student in costume making here in Brussels. I also work in an haberdashery where I sell fabric and I teach sewing classes. If you have followed my t-shirt saga, you might know that by now I have sewn a lot, and by a lot I mean over 20 t-shirts by now, so I have quite a few opinions about what works and what doesn't. So let me share some tips and tricks for successful t-shirt sewing. First, for knits, I do love clips. I use mostly clips when I sew my knits. It's very quick. I find it quicker to put my clips on than to put my pins in. However, for the neckline, I really prefer using pins because the clips tend to move, and if you want a really nice neat neckline where the excess fabric is distributed really evenly throughout the neckband, then I do prefer pins. I also put my pins perpendicularly for this specific use. Normally I always put them parallel to the edge of my fabric, but for this case I find that the way they move the less is perpendicular, and I also make sure that the pin goes in and out of the neckband and not only in the neckband and out of the fabric, otherwise it moves. You need to go in and out of both fabrics to be optimal, and really doing it like this, I've had such neat neckbands. Editing Noémie, I'm just missing here the sentence to say I actually sew with the neckband up and the t-shirt underneath, and I find that it's easier. This way I can actually stretch my neckband to match the length of my fabric, and I find that it's been the neatest way to work. For the top stitching of the neckband, if you do not use twin needles, I personally don't because my machine doesn't love them. I have a very cheap machine, discussion for another time. I actually prefer top stitching from the wrong side, but so I know that if you use a twin needle, you have to top stitch from the right side. I like it from the wrong side, I'm used to it, and I do it really neatly this way, but the proper way is from the right side. For the neckband length, I do like to start following just the pattern instructions. However, I've had actually one circumstance where the pattern instructions didn't really match my fabric and my neckband ended up being quite a little bit gaping. So in this case, I will quickly give you a formula where you can calculate your own neckband so that it looks nice and it doesn't gape. For a stiff fabric, you're going to use 90% of the length of your neck opening. For most fabric, you can use 80% of the neck opening, and for very, very stretchy fabric, you can use 70% of the opening. With knits, the key is really to keep a regular tension. This is a skill that you will keep on using. For example, when you do swimwear or lingerie, the work that you have with the stretch is always the same, and it's a little bit easier with knits. But so when you do, for example, the neckband again, just make sure that you're keeping a tension even. Don't pull really hard and then relax. Try to pull always at the same intensity. Obviously, this is something that comes with practice, but you will see that keeping an even tension, just like in knitting and crochet, keeping an even tension is really the key for a beautiful make. I would also like to say that all stretch isn't made equal. So there's some knits that are extremely stretchy and some that are pretty stable. So if you are starting, maybe try on the more stable side of knits. You can really feel that easily when you're at the fabric store and you give a little tug to the fabric. You will see if it totally comes with you and gives, or if it has a little bit more resistance. The more resistance in your knit, the easier it is going to be for you to sew with it if it's your first time with knits. However, it's also, I personally find it less comfy. On the reverse, be careful. Something too stretchy like a cotton modal blend is going to be really soft and maybe it's going to tend to look like pajamas. So for that classic t-shirt feeling, you don't want something too soft either. You have to find the sweet spot between comfort and stability. You will see that the amount of stretch you have in your knit also influences your comfort in your arms. I have some patterns that I really can't do with a stiffer knit because I find the arms too tight, because I really need the extra give in some of the patterns, and also your neckband and everything. You do get a very different comfort and also a very different look depending on the stretch you have in your knit. Last word on fabric, I am normally a pretty all natural fiber type of gal, but for knits I have realized that my preferred blends are, I will look at my notes, 60% cotton, 35% polyester and 5% elastane. That's something I really enjoy because it kind of softens the fabric in a way that really works for me. I have noticed that my 100% cotton t-shirts are really not my favorite in the feel of them, but also in the way they wash and wear. It's absolutely not my favorite. So I have noticed at least 25% of polyester really helps, and on the most high end of it, a little bit of tencel, but not too much, because again, too much tencel and it becomes maybe a bit too relaxed, but a little bit of tencel also really helps making a much nicer knit. So if you want to stay on the more premium side of things, I would say a cotton blend with a little bit of tencel in it would be perfect. But on the cheaper end, something that has a little bit of poly in it. Find your favorite seam allowance and stick with it. And if you have to modify the pattern, modify it. Many t-shirt patterns actually have a very small seam allowance because they plan for you to use the serger with them. But so as I have sewn all of my t-shirts on my domestic sewing machine with a zigzag stitch, sometimes it makes for a weird seam allowance that rolls up on itself, and it's very hard to then finish the seam. And I have realized for me 1 centimeter, 3/8 of an inch, that's a very good seam allowance to do with my domestic sewing machine. Your preferred seam allowance might be something totally different, but I think this is kind of true with all of sewing, but I have found it even more true in this case with knits, that adapting the pattern so that it is the seam allowance you like to use and you know works for you, it's worth adapting the pattern, so adding or removing the seam allowance so that it fits exactly what you like. For my exploration of knits, I have bought Wondertape and actually was not a fan of it. I ended up having my fingers all sticky all the time. So for people who don't know what Wondertape is, it is a double-sided tape that washes away in the first wash of your garment. So you can tape your hems with it, and then when you wash your t-shirt, it washes away. I found it quite messy to use. I didn't really enjoy putting it on, and I ended up finding it much easier to just put a ton of pin perpendicularly, as I have mentioned, in my hems and do my hems that way. And I just found it nicer than using the Wondertape, which I found messy, made my needle a little bit sticky, and also because the Wondertape is very stable, I couldn't have this very small amount of stretch I like to give in my hems. Obviously, you don't pull your hem, otherwise you're going to get something wavy, but I do like the small amount of tension I like to put in my fabric when I sew my hems. So I really prefer just using a ton of pins and skip the Wondertape. Finally, let's go full-on controversial, but as you might know, so I have sewn all of my t-shirt on my domestic sewing machine. I've mentioned that with a zigzag stitch. And if you are a regular on my channel, you know that I don't have an overlocker and that I don't consider buying one. It's not on my list of things at the moment, but actually, not that I work in a fabric store and I'm teaching sewing classes, I had not only to learn how to use an overlocker, but I had to kind of become a pro at it because I might need to help students with them during classes. So I can't just be a passive user of the overlocker. I had to become very closely acquainted with it. And actually, so I have sewn a t-shirt on the overlocker now, and I do like the finish. I can really appreciate the finish of the overlocker, but I still think it's not necessary. So if that makes you happy, if that's something you enjoy, by all means go for it. It's a beautiful tool, it does great things. I also think if you're short on budget and space, a domestic sewing machine works out fine. And something I already touched on about, but I think the love of the overlocked look just comes from ready to wear, and I don't aim to create ready to wear, I'm create me-mades. So not hating on the overlocker, I definitely enjoyed using it and I think it's a beautiful tool, but I just want to reassure you, if you want to make knits, I feel like sometimes there's a little bit of this discussion that you have to have an overlocker to make t-shirts, and you don't. You can make them on your domestic sewing machine and it works totally fine. The zigzag stitch really does the trick, and because knits don't fray, you could even not finish your seams at all. I personally prefer finishing them with a wider zigzag than the one I used for the construction, but you could leave them. So just wanted to say, overlocker, not a must, but if you want to have one, I also understand. So this is all I learned while sewing my 20 t-shirts. If there's any tips you have found that have changed your t-shirt making life, Please let me know, because I'm still making a few because apparently I'm never finished making t-shirts, and I'm sure everyone would be interested to read them in the comments as well if you have good tips for us. If you want to see my entire series about making t-shirts, I will link it in the description down below, and don't hesitate to go and watch that. Otherwise, I really want to thank Camilla for tipping me a coffee. Thank you so much, Camilla. It's so immensely appreciated. I hope this video was useful. Don't forget that you can make anything. Bye! I also put my pins perpendicularly because